Let's return to our main story now. 100 new licences to explore the North Sea for oil and gas are to be issued by the UK government. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says it will shore up our energy security, but the Scottish Greens say it shows a reckless disregard for people and the planet. Well, Patrick Harvie is the party's co-leader and a minister in the Scottish Government under Humza Yousaf. Mr Harvie, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. So I'm not surprised, of course, as the co-leader of the Scottish Greens, that you will depose the 100 new licences. But focusing on the carbon capture project, what about this idea that people see it as a part of the transition to net zero? Would you agree with that?
Well, look, I've never been opposed in principle to doing the research to find out whether carbon capture and storage might play some kind of role. I think it's more likely in relation to heavy industry, like places like Grangemouth or Morsmoran, than in energy generation. It absolutely mustn't be seen, though, as an excuse for business as usual in the oil and gas extraction end of the energy system. And that's what the UK government is doing right now. We know, the whole world knows, and everybody from the International Energy Agency to the UN is saying very clearly that unlimited oil and gas extraction, more of that is simply not compatible with a survivable pathway on addressing the climate emergency. The UK government is ignoring that reality and simply serving the interests of the industries that have caused the world to be at the brink of crisis right now.
If we are going to be reliant somewhat on fossil fuels for some time to come, is it not better that we do it in a more sustainable way from the UK than importing oil and gas from the likes of Russia?
Well, nobody is saying that oil and gas consumption stops overnight, or even that the existing fields should simply be switched off. This is about whether you approve new extraction from new fields that are currently not productive. If you do that, then you're locking in all of that extra production, and you're ensuring that all of that extra fossil carbon ultimately ends up in the atmosphere. But there's also a con that's being played by some people in this argument about saying this is domestic production to meet our domestic needs. Nonsense. These are globally traded commodities, and whatever comes out of these new fields won't change energy prices in this country. It won't even address energy security in a coherent way in terms of the country's energy security, because these products simply go onto the global market and seek the highest price that they can get. The whole world needs to recognise, especially in a summer that we've seen the clearest signals of the scale that the climate emergency has reached, that we need to move away from fossil fuels as rapidly as humanly possible. It has to be a just transition, and there'll be great jobs to come in Scotland from things like green hydrogen, as well as from renewable electricity generation itself. It has to be a just transition, but it also has to be fast enough to meet what the science demands.
Even Chris Stark, the chair of the UK's Climate Change Committee, acknowledges that carbon capture would play an important role in certain industries that we cannot transition to net zero, such as concrete production, steel production, farming. So it must have a place.
Well, I think it's dangerous to say must, because we simply don't know yet whether it will work. It has to ultimately be able to store that carbon for geologically significant periods of time. So we don't know, we can't rely on it as something that's a guaranteed part of our energy system. But as I said, I've got no objection to seeing the trials, to seeing some research and development to see whether it can work. But what it can't be used for is an excuse to continue business as usual in oil and gas extraction. That's very different from saying it might plausibly have a role to play in decarbonising heavy industry.
Let's also talk about the SNP and Green Party proposal, whereby the type of heating in a home will be taken into account when it comes to a property's EPC rating. Is that not punishing those people who cannot afford to, for example, replace an old boiler with a heat pump system when they're looking to sell their home?
No, we certainly shouldn't see this as being about punishing anyone. In fact, Scotland has more financial support to households that are looking to improve their energy efficiency and shift to zero-emission heating than any other part of the UK. Up to £15,000 in combination of grants and loans, with an extra £3,000 for rural areas that qualify.
People will still have to fork out, won't they, if it's a loan?
Well,
And it's money that people
gap,
potentially just can't be looking to spend when we're in a cost of living crisis.
The gap between the price of replacing a gas boiler and the replacement with a zero emission heating system, if you include the Scottish Government's grant, is diminishing all the time. And more companies that are at the leading edge of this, they're investing like never before in research and development to make cheaper heat pumps, smaller, quieter, more efficient, able to run at higher flow temperatures, incidentally more attractive to look at. They know that this is the way the industry is going. And if Scotland wants to meet our climate targets, we have to be at the leading edge of that.
There are some companies who would say, who work in renewables, Mr. Harvey, that would say that heat pumps actually are not as efficient in a country like Scotland when we see winter temperatures dropping to anything up to minus 15 degrees like we saw the most recent winter, and that actually heat pumps can stop working around -5. Is it a viable option for Scotland?
It absolutely is. Tell that argument to Norway. Norway has some of the coldest winters in Europe. 2/3 of households rely on heat pumps already, and they're still expanding and accelerating the installation of new ones. Countries like Norway, Finland, Estonia, Denmark, Sweden, the countries with the coldest winters in Europe, have the highest rates of installation of heat pumps. This is the way the industry is going. The Scottish Government is going to take a technology-neutral approach to setting the regulations. We'll talk about zero emission systems. There'll be a range of ways that people can achieve that. But I'm in no doubt that heat pumps will play a really important role. And we're determined not just to wield a big stick and regulate, but to put in the financial support that people need to make it viable.
And it's a discussion we will continue to have, I'm sure. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Patrick Harvey, for joining us on the programme.